Hello, welcome to the YouTube channel, AntiNeoConfederate. That's one word, AntiNeoConfederate. And if you go to that website, you will, of course, you're at that website because you're watching this video. There's also a webpage, templeofdemocracy.com. There's also a podcast, Newt Night, at libsyn, libsyn.com. Additionally, we have a Facebook page, De-Racialize the Landscape, to deal with the issues of white supremacy on the landscape. If you go to any one of those, you'll find links or contacts to go to the others. So today I have a topic. I want to talk about the Neo-Confederate movement and its opposition to the Black Lives Matter movement. So I have something to show and tell first. Let me show this to you. This is a flag being sold to Neo-Confederates. I think I'm holding it right. So this is a Blue Lives Matter flag, the blue stripe through it, but you'll see this is a Confederate battle flag where the blue and the red has been converted to black, and then a blue stripe put on top of it. This is being sold in the Neo-Confederate movement. I'm going to take a break here. I'm going to hang it up behind me so that we can look at it while I'm talking about it. Okay, I'm back. I wanted the flag to be mounted so we can see it as I'm talking about it. So I purchased this. Purchased it from a place called Cooters. Cooters was a character in the Dukes of Hazzard TV series. You know, they drove around with that flag painted on top of the Robert E. Lee car. And additionally, I'm trying to find something here. This has been sold elsewhere. So, I'm unpacking my supplies. And this is it right here. So, I want to show this to you. This is it's also sold at Southern Legal Resource Center. They sell this flag. They're the guys who've been filing lawsuits to keep Confederate monuments from being taken down. They filed quite a few lawsuits. So I think the fact is they are major players in terms of defending Confederate heritage. And I think the flag behind me and the flag that's the same flag that's sold on their website sort of tells you what Confederate heritage is all about. It isn't limited just, by the way, just to this flag. But also is a book they sell. You probably can't see it here. I'm going to have an enclosed image. But it says Confederate Flags Matter. You know, Confederate Flags Matter. And they published this in 2015. In my opinion, I think it's clearly a response to the Black Lives Matter movement. Though there's no reference to African Americans in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement or to the Black Lives Matter movement itself. But I think that, to me, it comes across as a snarky reply to the Black Lives Matter movement. So it's not just those, you know, this one flag. This, by the way, is sold on the online Sons of Confederate Veterans webpage in their shop. And I think I've seen it sell elsewhere by them. I think it's in their catalog too. Yes, it is. It's in their merchandise catalog in some of the years have carried this. The person who wrote this, by the way, H. Rondell Rumberg, it's right here, he has been the chaplain of chief of the Sons of Confederate Veteran. And for a long, long time, he was also the editor of the Chronicles of the Chaplain's Corps of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. So this guy is not just a single member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. He's held prominent positions. I think his opinions or his attitudes can be said to be representative. And so I want to get into the response to the Black Lives Matter. Let me sort of move some of this around. I've tagged everything so we follow chronological order. So this is the March 2015 issue. By that time, there have been a lot of protests in Ferguson over the shooting by a police officer of a young African-American person. And the Black Lives Matter movement is going. So in here is a report of the Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief, Thomas V. Strain, Jr. Now, the Sons of Confederate Veterans has a Commander-in-Chief, and they have a Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief. It's the second in command. So here it is. And before I read it, I want to make it clear. Nowhere in the Confederate veteran issues, which I'm going to go through, do they mention Black Lives Matter, nor do they mention, in regards to these issues, African Americans. But it's pretty clear to me, and I think could be inferred or understood by any reasonable person reading this, that this is about the Black Lives Matter movement and the shooting in Ferguson, Missouri. So let me just read some extracts from here. And evidently he titles it Courage. And he says, courage is what he quotes Winston Churchill, that you need courage to say the truth. So he says, compatriots, the United States are enduring some very troubling times currently. We have young men with no guidance attacking law-abiding citizens and law enforcement officers in the streets of this country. Moreover, when the officers do what is necessary in many cases to remedy the situation and protect the innocent, they're being called murderers. Following this, we have people taking to the streets, rioting and looting local businesses, all in the name of peace and tranquility. And then there's another thing, and he says it's not a black and white issue, it's a right versus wrong issue. And then here's another part. To make matters worse, a certain group of self-appointed leaders who wish to prosper from the very people they claim to be helping don't speak of peace and instead call for riots and more violent acts. And he says also that the people who speak up against him are called racist. So you might be asking, what does this have to do with the Sons of Confederate Veterans? This is, contemporary riots and complaints about the police. And he brings that up. Thomas Strain says, you are probably wondering what this has to do with the Sons of Confederate Veterans. And the answer is simple. Reconstruction is where the very seeds were planted for such situations, and those years is found the root causes of where much of this began. And he talks about the government being centralized and there being consequences of Reconstruction. Therefore, the law and the way we run our government is wrong. And I want to take a break here. A lot of focus on Confederate monuments has been talking about the past and how we deal with the past and test of memory. People don't realize this Neo-Confederacy is an ongoing ideology, even unto this day. And there's an interpretation of current events according to a Neo-Confederate ideology. He further states, did our ancestors riot and loot their neighbors during these times? And then he goes on, they did because they're great Christians and they're courageous Southerners. And, how he feels that Hollywood doesn't treat the Confederacy right and a lot of other people. So the thing is, like I said, if you go through here, you're not going to find African Americans written to. And you talk about the looting in the streets, you're not going to find the mention of the word Ferguson or even as far as I can tell, Missouri. There's not going to be any direct reference, but I think reading this through, you understand I talk about Ferguson and the Black Lives Matter. So this is May, April, and the topic comes up again. And it's something called Continue the Fight. And he talks about, Confederate monuments are coming down, so he has some other things to talk about. But he says, in my article a few months ago, I made mention of the state of the society we live in today. All across the country, we have had people rioting and looting because something happened to an individual whom they didn't even know. During one of the latest occurrences, I was watching the news, and one of the reporters mentioned professional rioters. And it goes on, he did some research, and after researching, he says, after researching this a bit, I found that this is an actual profession for some people in the country. So he thinks there's professional rioters, and he doesn't mention Black Lives Matter here. He does not mention African Americans. But the news coverage, in certain right-wing media, I believe, claimed that there were professional rioters. So he actually buys into that. There's people sort of like show up and professionally riot. And then he talks about the breakdown of Christian values, and he says, we have children growing up today being raised to have no respect for others and even no self-respect. And he says they show no respect to their teachers, law enforcement officers, and even in some cases, their own parents. But he wants to give a contrasting group. In contrast, during the 1860s, there was a great Christian revival which took place in the South. Many of the young men who had gone off to fight for their country, the Confederate States, America, were from rural settings, hillsides, and the mountains of the South. Many had never seen, some had never been to organized church service before they went to the fields of battle and realized they needed God in their lives. So he's referring to these people who are protesting everything, and he sees also the society falling apart, and that's the cause of these disturbances, and he wants to contrast them to what he sees as the good guys, the Confederate soldiers. And he goes on and says, later on here, it's an absolute shame that in many parts of this country, these same values have been lost, and as a direct result, we have people getting murdered in the streets of America today. While I do agree that some of these murders could have been avoided and excessive force is used in some cases, most it is due to the lack of trust and total disregard to the laws and authority figures, as well as the disrespect for the lives, properties, and rights of other individuals. So, actually, this violence that's committed, these murders, it's the fault of these, African Americans. But again, he hasn't actually mentioned police here, though he said that, there's no respect for the police, I believe, somewhere here. But he doesn't mention Black Lives Matter. He doesn't mention African Americans. But I think the readers would be able to figure out what he's talking about. And so, going on, we have this page, just a second. And it's Strain again as Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief. And he is talking about SCV, the need for modernization, but he does have some comments relevant to the section's discussion. Today in this country, we are once again facing some very trying times. We are living in an ungodly era which entails a breakdown in the family structure, lowering of educational standards, especially in the realm of history. He puts that in parentheses, I suspect, because to him, since people don't venerate the Confederacy anymore, he sees that as a breakdown. A growth in dependence on government and an erosion of individual morality, and personal liberty. All these things have in one form or another contributed to the current climate we find ourselves in. And then he goes, I'll skip this about Jefferson Davis. We have witnessed during the past year the fruits of his words. Well, he's talking about, I better read it here. He talks about Jefferson Davis saying dependence begets subservience and venality suffocates the germ of virtue. And I think this is referring to what he sees as should be welfare. But he doesn't actually spell things out always so precisely. We have witnessed during the past year the fruits of his words being carried out right before our very eyes with murders and riots, looting and pillaging, and humans generally conducting themselves in the lowest and most primal manners. Whether some of these folks are merely starving for attention or undertaking a ploy for some form of political gain is anyone's guess. It largely depends on the motives of the individual in question. And so he's seeing as these protests as being venial. Now, I'll repeat it again. Black Lives Matter is not referred to, and there's no reference to African Americans, but I think you'd have to be pretty obtuse not to conclude, at least in my opinion, you'd have to be pretty obtuse not to conclude it's about the Black Lives Matter and the protests over police shootings of African Americans. And he relates this to Confederate monuments. He said, the latter, these are politicians who he feels are working the issue. The latter, rather than address the real issues, have instead diverted, triangulated, and shifted the issues to suit their own agendas and to follow the path of least resistance. Among the easy targets for politicians, as we are all painfully aware, have been our Confederate symbols, monuments, and even our history itself. So there's a connection between these protests and these monuments coming down. Now, he's Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief. Now, all this stuff about Black Lives Matter, which he doesn't actually mention, but all this talk about looting, professional rioters, and stuff like that, which I think is pretty apparent, did not keep him from being elected Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. So he was elected, and one of the things he does is very few first proclamation, General Order 2016-01, is about Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. So let me read this. It's online here and there still, but this is on Facebook on the Sons of Confederate Veteran official page. Number one, whereas with the current vicious and despicable attacks being waged against the law enforcement officers around the country today, and whereas law enforcement officers are the domestic protectors of our citizens, our society, and our way of life, and whereas the society cannot survive without the valued dedication and sacrifices of our law enforcement officers, the support from their families, and whereas responsible citizens have a moral duty to support the institutions and citizens who place their lives in peril every single day so that our society can enjoy the rights, privileges, and freedoms of citizens of a great republic which our forefathers and God provided us. Therefore, he goes, and then it goes, therefore, we announced Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. There's a lot of interesting ways he sets up this issue. The issue hasn't been with the Black Lives Matter movement that we do not lead, that there is no need for law enforcement. There's no need to have some type of thing to maintain order. What it is about is African Americans being recklessly and needlessly shot because some guy's an idiot. And several of those people who are doing it have actually gone to jail, for the murders. And so it's not, but he's trying to frame it that it's anarchy versus having some form of law enforcement. And also the criticism of African Americans being shot recklessly by the police is called vicious. The criticism is called vicious and despicable. So, that's how he's framing the issue. So he's all in on, being entirely against it. Now, again, it doesn't say Black Lives Matter here, and it doesn't mention African Americans, or for that matter, any minority. So, later, September 2016, this was issued, by the way, July 2016, July 21st, 2016. So later that year, he has an article. Well, actually, later this year, it starts appearing in their paper. You start seeing here. You start seeing they're presenting these awards to law enforcement departments in the South. In this case, it's the St. Clair County Sheriff's Department and Asheville Police Department, Fire Department in Alabama. So they're getting an award from the Sons of Confederate Veterans. You have a police department that's working with Neo-Confederates. Again, Law Enforcement Appreciation Awards were given out by the Fort Hyman Camp in Murray, Kentucky, and this is May, June 2017. Now, you'll see an abrupt change. Here's yet another one. In this case, they're presenting an award to the Harrison Police Department. This is the November, December 2016. Okay, this is the May, June 2018, and they're presenting an award to the Albemarle City Police Department and the Stanley County Sheriff's Department, and this is in North Carolina. So it's still going on. Okay, so this is September, October 2018. This is the new Commander-in-Chief, Mr. Gramling, Policy Gramling Jr. And he states, as Commander-in-Chief, I issued Order 2018-1 proclaiming August 16, 2018 Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. This is a noteworthy practice started by my predecessor, and he talks about it as very important. And then he links it into the protests against the Confederate monument down in San Antonio, Texas a while back. While attending a flag rally in San Antonio, Texas a year ago, I noticed the vile treatment of law enforcement officers were receiving at the hands of our detractors on the other side of the park where the Confederate monument stood. And he said they made it that they were not like the people on the other side of the park. They said, we thank the law enforcement people. So he's trying to relate BLM or struggle against BLM, which, by the way, he does not mention, nor does he mention African Americans. He does mention the protesters here, to the movement against Confederate monuments. And so again, another one. They're presenting, this is August 2019, and it's the Spanish Fort Police Department's getting an award, and that's right outside of Mobile, Alabama. So they're getting an award from the Sons of Confederate Veterans. And I know it's getting tedious, but I want to show it's just not a one-time thing. It's ongoing, and it's happening again and again. In this case, this camp is in Knoxville, and it's given to the Blount County Justice Center. That's where they're giving it, and it's a Blount County Sheriff officer from Tom Gronstrom. So that's another place in Tennessee. So this is going on again. there was on the Facebook page, the Sons of Confederate Veterans official, the 2018-1 law enforcement page, law enforcement general orders, making it a day of support. And then you can find on the website the Law Enforcement Appreciation Award. It's downloadable. You can print it out. This one I printed out on October 26, 2019. May not be there today, you know, it's been a day or so, but it's there. It was there. So the program is still ongoing, and there's these pictures they have submitted to the magazine. That doesn't necessarily mean it's only happening in those police departments or just a few per year. This is just what certain camps decide to submit pictures for coverage in the Confederate veteran. There may be many more cases where the police department is accepting awards to the Sons of Confederate Veterans. So the Sons of Confederate Veterans and the Neo-Confederate movement is trying to staking out a position in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement and its criticism of some police departments. And again, Neo-Confederacy is not about the distant past. Neo-Confederacy is about current issues. And just to repeat again, in none of these documents have I found any mention for the Black Lives Matter movement. And in none of these documents have I seen reference to African Americans per se or any form. The words aren't used. So it is an interesting thing, and it's very typically Neo-Confederate. It's not exactly on its face what it's about, but you're reading it through, and you sort of becomes, to me anyways, pretty obvious what I think it's about. You might, if you can get a hold of the text, you might find that, you know, it's pretty obvious. So that's what Neo-Confederacy is about. It's taking a side against the Black Lives Matter movement. That's my interpretation of these texts. I thank you for your time. We're going to have more videos. I think I'm going to try to roll them out once a week, maybe once every 10 days, and start reporting on some of this stuff about the Neo-Confederate movement, so you know what it's really about. It's not a bunch of sentimental sobbing about the past. It's not talking really about ancestors. It's very current. It's very real. This organization has 30,000 members, and it is not really recognized as a hostile organization to civil rights, though I think some people may have figured it out on their own. And so we need to recognize what their agenda is, and when we see them, we need to recognize what their full agenda is. Again, thank you for your time.